Oncologists at the end of the day care that their patients are getting the best possible clinical care and getting as much support as possible. And so I think the first place of alignment when we talk with any oncology practice is like, this is good for patients. Let us talk to you about, give you patient stories, demonstrate how this can help benefit patients. And so if you can't demonstrate that, it's a conversation stopper with any practice.
Welcome to the Healthcare Grind, where we cut through the noise in the healthcare industry to bring you the latest trends, innovations, and insider insights. I'm Jess Hearthcock, and I'm joined by my co-host, Lon Hecht, as we embark on a journey to connect early-stage healthcare companies, payer executives, and investors with the knowledge and perspectives that matter most. Get ready to grind in the fast-paced realm of healthcare innovation. And for more advanced content, go to healthcaregrind.com.
Hi, everyone. This is Lon Hecht with the Healthcare Grind. Welcome back. Joined by my co-host, Jessica Hearthcock. And we have an amazing guest this morning that is joining us, Brad Diephuis, who is the president and COO of Thyme Care in the value-based oncology space. Can't tell you how excited we are to have you on the show this morning. Really excited to learn more about your business.
Thanks so much for having me, Lon.
Thank you. So we'd like to kick off the episode typically with a 30 to 60 second elevator pitch. If you could take that away, that'd be great.
Sounds great. So as you already mentioned, Lon, Thyme Care is a value-based care company in the oncology space. We focus on providing support to people as they are going through cancer care. We do that. We employ a team of nurses, what we call care partners, think lay health navigators, all overseen by nurse practitioners and both primary care doctors and oncologists who provide virtual wraparound care to patients as they're going through their treatments. We also partner closely with oncology practices in all of the markets that we work in, and all ultimately with the goal of providing a better experience for members as they are going through cancer care, addressing any issues that come up, and ultimately bending the cost curve by reducing hospitalizations, making a dent in some of the exceptionally high drug costs that can really be quite challenging for patients as they go through cancer care. And we're excited to be continuing to grow and scale this business.
That's awesome. Hey, real quick, could you give us an idea? You said outcomes. Could you tell us a little bit about the outcomes? And then we'll dive into more about the program.
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at a number of different outcomes. So sort of probably among the most important is member satisfaction. We have incredibly high satisfaction in our program. We have very low dropout rates out of our program. And ultimately, the reason we created this company was to help patients who are going through one of the most challenging parts of their lives. But, of interest to our partners as well, we have great financial outcomes as well. We published in ASCO, which is the American Society of Clinical Oncology, the leading oncology academic group, and have shown very significant and growing actual total cost of care savings for members that have enrolled in our program. In our most recent study, we saw about $600 per engaged member per month savings. So most of that savings, and as we show in that study, actually came from reductions in inpatient utilization. We've seen this across a lot of other models in the primary care space and in the kidney disease space, that when you support patients and when you make sure that gaps in care don't open up, you can really drive true efficiencies that are both better for patients and better for the bottom line of the payer and the patient themselves, given the out-of-pocket costs associated with a lot of these things that make real impacts for patients.
That's fantastic, Brad. We love the good outcome stories. All the businesses that we've had on the podcast, that's the one common thread, is everyone seems to have pretty outstanding outcomes. And that's fantastic. That's why we're all in healthcare, right? Can you dive in a little bit more into really what some of the key differentiators are of your model and kind of that secret sauce? What makes Thyme Care special? What do you think really drives towards those outcomes and helping members get the care that they need?
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe two key threads I'll highlight. The first is payers already have different case management programs or nurse-driven programs that can be across broad populations, and I think have shown different results in different populations. I think what we find is really important is that oncology is its own special beast. It has a whole different set of drugs. It has its own different nomenclature. I'm a primary care doctor, and there are many oncology drugs that I frankly don't know how to pronounce, much less know the complexities of their different side effect profiles. And so one thing we have focused on is that every single nurse that works with our team has worked in oncology previously. And so many of them come from large academic medical centers. Others come from community oncology practices, but just sort of know the ins and outs of oncology care very well. and are able to sort of quickly understand and relate to a patient's, whatever may be the reason a patient calls into our service, they're able to quickly internalize that and understand the specifics of that problem pretty well. The other part of this that I think is a unique aspect of our model is, I mentioned this a brief bit at the beginning, is that we partner very closely with oncologists in all the markets that we work in. And so when we form those partnerships, they're fairly deep partnerships where we have EHR access with the oncology practices. And so our nurses, our care partners, our nurse practitioners have direct access, not just to the claims data that we receive from our payer partners, but actually also the clinical EHR level data on those patients, and have the ability to see exactly what's happening with that patient, post notes back into that EHR, and I think much more effectively coordinate care than the average sort of third party service is able to do. We see that as a very differentiated aspect of our model. The other key part of that oncology practice relationship is that we actually go into different quality incentive programs with those oncology practices in order to help ensure that they are driving high value care. And so these include different metrics around, are we prescribing high value drugs, and are we making therapeutic substitutions where appropriate, as well as just engaging on all of the clinical coordination activities that are key to making our model successful.
That's really interesting. So help me out with this. I just want to make sure I understand. Obviously, one of the hardest things when you get into healthcare is there are a lot of great programs out there, but getting patients into the program tends to be challenging, right? So let's just take a payer customer that you have. How does that work in market? So you have a payer, they want to work with you, they contract with you. Do you only work with those oncologists that you partner with where you have that EHR level access, or is it all oncologists? And then how do patients kind of opt themselves into the program? How do they get in there? I feel like where the rubber meets the road is typically tends to be where the challenge is. So love to learn a little bit more about the model.
Yeah, absolutely, Lon. I think maybe it's worth stepping back a second and just talking about what's our business model in general. Is that like many value-based care organizations, we sell into anybody who's holding total cost of care risk for patients. So whether or not that's a Medicare Advantage plan, a commercial fully insured plan, at-risk primary care groups that are taking downstream risk from an insurance plan, as well as we're actually starting to explore the direct-to-employer route as well. In those contracts, we define what we call our program population. We have a claims-based definition of who are the members that we believe will really benefit from this model. And without going into the nuances of the claims-based algorithm, it's trying to capture members that are going through active cancer treatment. And so at a high level, you need to have both a cancer diagnosis and some treatment code for ongoing chemotherapy, immunotherapy, some form of systemic therapy. When we implement with a payer, to go back to your question, Lon, we have our payer partner run that logic on their end, and they will send us some regular feed of who are the eligible members. And that may be on a monthly or weekly basis, depending on how we set up the data structures. And from that point on, it's actually Thyme Care's responsibility to try to reach out and to enroll those patients. And we do that in a number of different ways. The simplest is we pick up the phone and we call them. We have a lot of different work around our enrollment campaigns. And we actually see really high levels of enrollment with that type of model, which I think shows I think both we spent a lot of work on the enrollment process, but also the needs are really high in this patient set. And when we call and we talk about what Thyme Care's value to a patient may be, it tends to resonate pretty well with the people we reach out to. Obviously, cold calling is not the only answer. And so with all of our payer partners, we engage in some marketing campaigns to try to sort of raise the visibility of this program. And then importantly, we actually leverage those oncology practice relationships that we spoke about before. To be clear, when we enter into market, we will help support all of the members in those markets that meet our program population definition. And a subset of those will end up going to our partnered oncology practices. We've seen in our ASCO studies that we're delivering savings across that full population. We're just able to sort of boost enrollment. We're able to do more of that quality incentive program type activity when members are going to one of our partnered oncology practices. And so when that happens, they'll actually directly assist in enrollment. We can see, oh, here's a member that's in our roster, and we're seeing them at one of our oncology practices EHRs. And we will enlist that oncology practice directly in helping us to enroll and engage that patient into our model.
The value-based model that you have, do you have to enter that contract with each individual oncology practice, or do they just they can just opt in at any time? How does that work?
Yeah, so we go directly into a value-based contract with the payer or the risk-bearing entity, whatever it may be. that is independent of any downstream contracts we may have with oncology practices. We've talked to a lot of payers who have gone down the route of trying to do individual oncology practice level value-based care contracts. And I think that proves challenging for a number of reasons. One of which is that just the administrative complexity of trying to manage that across a number of different practices becomes fairly complicated. Two is that oncology practices, I think, recognize that value-based care is something that is coming down the pike and is an increasingly important focus in healthcare. But at the same time, I think are pretty reticent to go into meaningful two-sided or downside risk relationships with payers. And so I think when payers have gone down that route, some of them have not seen the results that they might hope. And we saw this a little bit with CMMI's OCM model, where it's more effective when you have more skin in the game from the oncology practices or from the partner that you are taking risk with. And it's hard for those practices to be successful at really bending the cost curve, independent of more resources that can allow them to deploy the type of model that Thyme Care deploys. And so our pitch to payers is like, hey, let's remove that complexity for you. You give this to Thyme Care. We're going to take on that risk across that entire population, regardless of which oncologist they're going to. And we know that we are driving value for all of those members with our wraparound set of services. We then can amplify that value through relationships we try to grow to a pretty significant level, this number of oncology practices that we work with. But some oncology practices won't be working with us, and that's fine. We still clinically coordinate with those members. Our nurses call up and talk to their nurse triage folks. And, I can name many academic medical centers that we don't have direct contractual relationships with, but our clinical teams work with on a day-to-day basis on a variety of different patients. It's just that when we engage with those practices in value-based quality and incentive program payments and programs, we're able to sort of make more of a dent on the drug side specifically.
Question for you, Brad. So kind of in listening to you speak, you're incredibly, obviously very knowledgeable about the space, but I feel like there's more coming through of just the experiences that you've had. Can you talk about how Thyme Care kind of started out? You've talked about the model, but how has the model evolved or changed, or where have some of those learnings been so you've improved the model to make it better to see some of these bigger results?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm not a co-founder of Thyme Care. Robin Shaw and Bobby Green are two co-founders. And really the challenge that they saw, and I saw this myself as a practicing primary care doctor, and really just anybody in the medical field will tell you that they get that phone call not infrequently, and it's from a friend or a friend of a friend or a work colleague, and it's either themselves or a close family member has a cancer scare or a diagnosis with maybe just had a positive biopsy that showed that they have cancer, and they're looking for help as to where to go for their treatment and what to do, what are the right questions to ask. And I've always been happy to sort of take those phone calls and to answer those, and so is everybody at Thyme Care, and many of whom have had a long experience pre-Thyme Care in the oncology space. But, it fundamentally brings up the question of you shouldn't need to have a friend who knows oncology in order to get great care in the oncology space and to get that navigation. And so often people fall through the cracks in that model where it takes too long to get to a diagnosis. There are very preventable side effects of treatment that aren't being addressed because there are communication gaps between a patient and their oncologist. There's a lot of challenges around end-of-life care that we can spend a good deal of time talking about on the show. But those challenges we've known about and have been top of mind since the beginning of Thyme Care. I'm actually a cancer survivor myself. I had a bone cancer in my early 20s, and fortunately long in the rearview mirror by now, but experienced many of these same challenges myself, despite being treated at an amazing academic medical center and overall receiving great care. And so, long way of answering your question, Jess, is we started off with this fundamental thesis that we need to help more patients who are going through cancer care, and we're going to figure out whatever way we can do to do that. And we just started figuring out, before we figured out the sales model or risk-based contracting model, we focused on that core problem. I think where we've evolved a lot over the past 2, 3, 4 years since the founding of Thyme Care is really nailing some of the things we talked about in the prior question, which is how do we actually, and from a business perspective, interact with our payer partners? How do we create a compelling value proposition? How do we structure those risk-based contracts in a repeatable way? These are all challenges that, I think when we started off the company, we were focused more on the member experience side. And I think we've matured a ton in terms of benchmarking our program population definition, our enrollment funnels, and then furthermore, iterating on the complexity of care that we can help support. we started off as purely a nurse and lay health navigator service. We have since expanded and actually have our own provider entity, our own PC group that employs nurse practitioners and overseen by oncologists and primary care doctors. And so we can prescribe bridge medications where necessary for patients and have really up-leveled the care model itself. And so a lot of evolution in our 4+ years in existence, and expect that to continue to evolve and change as we figure out more ways for us to bring value to members and our payer partners.
So something you talked about really resonates with me. So my wife is a palliative care nurse, was a former hospice nurse.
Yeah.
And you talked about kind of having like a friend in the industry, right? And I feel like it all comes down to advocacy. And I feel like that's something that patients feel like is very lost. They typically don't have someone in their corner. And I feel like that's a big edge for a payer to have that feeling that they're doing something that actually drives advocacy for a patient.
Yeah.
So I commend that. I see a ton of value. I'm seeing that pop up all over the place. We recently did an episode on dementia care and others. So having advocacy is such a key point. Quick question for you. The oncology practices, what did they perceive as in it for them? I can think of many things that they would see in it for them. And one I would think you do is you probably bring just a whole lot of support to a practice that they can't do themselves. So I think it's something that, probably drives a lot of value for patients. But I'd love to hear just what you feel like is what kind of pushes them into the model or what brings them in.
It's a great question, and one that we think about a lot as we've grown our set of oncology practices. We have over 800 oncologists in our model today, and that we expect to continue to grow rapidly over the next year plus. But what's in it for the oncologist? I think first and foremost and most important is that oncologists at the end of the day care that their patients are getting the best possible clinical care and getting as much support as possible. And so I think the first place of alignment when we talk with any oncology practice is like, this is good for patients. Let us talk to you about, give you patient stories, demonstrate how this can help benefit patients. And so if you can't demonstrate that, it's a conversation stopper with any practice. After that, I think then you start getting into, okay, well, like, how is this going to help me as an oncology practice? And what are the ways in which this is going to make both financial and clinical sense and worth the sort of integration lift that it involves? I think there's a number of different reasons why oncology practices sort of get excited and get over that hump. First is that we take work off their plates. And so many of them have the experience of trying to roll out some of the types of services that we deploy. I mentioned previously the oncology care model. It was the first CMMI model in the oncology space. And many, particularly community oncology practices, opted to join into that model and are built out their own nurse navigation staff. And I think what they found was it is hard to staff and create that on a repeatable basis. It helps to have a technology platform that can actually support that. And just the infrastructure costs of that are pretty high. And I think they have seen a lot of value in saying, okay, actually, particularly where these risk-based, the OCM model ended, and there was a year period where there was no successors Medicare fee-for-service model. And then there's been sporadic bits of this in the private payer space. Many of them saw that as, look, maybe I actually don't want to insource this myself, and maybe it makes more sense to actually work with a third party that can deliver this in a repeatable way. And so that's, I think, one clear source of value that we've seen with provider partners. The other is that we will highlight those oncology practices that we work with when we work with our provider partners. So like some of our contracts, as I mentioned, was we work with risk-bearing primary care groups. And so if an oncology practice, ultimately at the end of the day, these practices are looking for volume of patients to deliver care to. And if we can help highlight to other practices or to payers themselves as to these are practices that are committed to high value care and can actually help attract patients to them, that is a huge source of value to the practices. And then finally, and importantly, is that we actually put in place these quality incentive programs where practices can actually get financial rewards for participating in these types of programs. And so when we structure those, we think about how can we make it worth the while of the practice to really engage in these activities that they know they want to do and they know they should do, but maybe don't have the, it costs resources to engage with any program like this. And so we're able to help offset some of those costs through this quality incentive program. And so, in some, I sort of combine it. It's good for patients. It helps offload work, can drive volume, and can ultimately lead to financial rewards for the practice themselves. And so we try to check all those boxes with each of the individual practices, and I guess demonstrated its success in the large amount of growth we've had on that practice partnership over time.
That's great. That's fantastic. Brad, I want to back up for a second because your background is really impressive. And sometimes we get so excited. I mean, Lon and I are salespeople, right? We get so excited about the model and we get excited about, the outcomes and the trajectory that the company is on, we forget to go back and really talk about the person. And so can you just give listeners a little bit of idea of who you are, what your background is, and how you got to Thyme Care?
Sure, absolutely. Happy to share. I think, I mentioned a formative experience in my early 20s of going through cancer treatment myself. And sort of before that, I was one of those cool kids who was programming when I was 10 years old. I majored in electrical engineering and computer science, and medicine was nowhere on the roadmap for me. I hadn't really considered a career in that space and went through my own cancer treatment. And as I mentioned, many people in healthcare are sort of familiar with this sort of uncomfortable dichotomy that I felt like I had amazing individual physicians and like amazing caretakers during my treatment. And despite that, I felt like there were so many things that fell through the cracks. And I came out of that experience feeling like, man, like, healthcare is really important, and there are some parts of healthcare that, at least in America, that I think in my mind were either broken or have the opportunity for a great deal of improvement. And after a lot of soul searching, made the decision to sort of make this pretty dramatic career pivot from sort of the engineering computer science world into medicine, and went to med school, became a practicing primary care doc, still see patients one day a week, actually, and really value my time with patients. But the time I spent in my clinical training and clinical practice, I think I've always been attracted to both. How do you take care of the patient in front of you? And then how do you think about system level changes that can impact across a broader set of patients? And as I was going through my own medical training journey, I think the focus on value-based care was on the rise, and CMMI was putting out, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation was putting out a lot of their different payment models after the ACA, and became really excited by that world. I had the fortunate opportunity to train through an organization that was a participant in the Pioneer ACO model, one of the very first CMMI ACO models, and learned a ton around care navigation and wraparound care, and really just how do you think about operating in a value-based environment from that world. Took a detour myself, actually, and ran a health IT startup that I founded and grew that was more on the pure technology side play, and then came out of that experience feeling like, man, like technology is both great, and if you don't add something that actually changes the underlying incentive models, it's hard for technology alone to move the needle. And had the opportunity about 4 years ago now to go to Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, where I worked as a senior advisor under the Biden administration, and worked on a number of different value-based payment models there, including what is now the ACO REACH model. And, that was an amazing opportunity. I highly recommend anybody who is focused on the space to find some time to work in the public sector. I think it gives you an amazing appreciation for the work that is being done. And, the sense of scale that you get at a Medicare is really unlike what you can get at any healthcare organization other than maybe just at Optum and United. But the scale of impact you can have is tremendous. While I was there, getting back to the Thyme Care story, I think a lot of different companies, a lot of different participation in the primary care oriented models we had. So, or the total cost of care models like the ACO REACH model, like the different primary care models that CMMI put out. And I think that space is becoming more and more mature. I became convinced that the next sort of frontier of value-based care is on the specialty care side. And I think we've seen a lot of this on the chronic kidney disease space. So there's a number of different companies out there now that are providing services to members that are going through late stage kidney disease or end stage renal disease. But I think across a lot of the other specialty domains, we're still in the early innings of that. Oncology felt to me as this area where there is incredibly high costs, and with high costs means opportunity for savings. There are probably the area where there's been the most biomedical innovation in the last 20 years. We've had tons of amazing new therapeutics, and we can do way more for patients than we could 20, 30, 40 years ago. And at the same time, I think we've probably done less around care model innovation and how do we think about supporting patients through treatment during that time? And obviously, oncology was an area that I had this deep personal connection to. And I was becoming convinced of that thesis at the same time. I was hearing about this company, Thyme Care, that was starting off in this space and was founded by folks that had spent decades in the oncology industry. A lot of our founding team came from Flatiron Health, which was a health tech leader in the oncology space, and became really convinced that both this problem was real and there were solutions to be made in that space. And Thyme Care had built the early stage team that was going to make them successful in this space. And so I joined Thyme Care about 2 years ago, and I've had the opportunity to serve a number of different hats at that company, starting off on the growth side and then overseeing more of our benchmarking actuarial side, and recently taking over our oversight of our operations group as well. And so it's been an awesome ride. I've learned a ton from Thyme Care, and very grateful for the amazing team that we have here that's really making a difference in cancer care.
Well, Brad, thanks for the background. We're going to wrap up in a minute. I do have one more question for you. but like to try and keep this, tight on time if we can. We try to make these episodes like 30 minutes or less, just so they're commutable for people, right?
Absolutely.
When they're on their drive into the office. But my question is, why do payers say no? Because I feel like they should say yes. And then what is the misconception that probably drives them to say no, right? Because to me, it just seems like something that makes so much sense. So could you give us maybe like 30 to 60 seconds on this one, if that's possible, because I'm sure this could be an hour-long answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think mostly we don't get no's from payers. We get not yets from payers. And
they usually don't say no.
They're good at that. They're very effective at polite no's. But I think that there's a couple of reasons why that can happen. One is, as I mentioned before, payers, this is not a new problem. Payers have been looking at this challenge for a while, and many of whom have their own either internal programs or direct value-based care contracts with oncology practices that they may see as in conflict with what Thyme Care is delivering. And so I think that's, our strongest competitor in some ways is where there's not a lot of the companies that are doing exactly what we are doing from a third party basis. I think our strongest competitor is actually what the payers are doing internal to their own organizations. And I think it depends a lot as to, when are you approaching the payer at a time that they are sort of rethinking their oncology strategy or realizing that there's actually a lot of benefit from, it's in some ways, it's a lot easier for Thyme Care to call a patient and help support them through care than your friendly insurance company. Not every patient has
exactly
the most positive valence towards their insurance company. And so I think it depends a lot on sort of where the payer is in terms of their sort of internal life cycle of how they're thinking about oncology. It's, increasingly a really high priority for many of the payers that we're speaking to. And I think the other aspect of it is just geographic overlap. We started off in the New York, New Jersey area. We've rapidly expanded. We're across over 30 states now. I think it's taking a little bit of time for the market assessment of like, oh, Thyme Care, you actually have scale across a number of different markets to catch up. And, we have a lot of payers that say, hey, we really love the model, check back in a year as you have more data, more markets. And I think by next year, we'll have a couple large national payer contracts that'll be going across a number of different states. And I think we'll continue to grow significantly from there.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great episode. For folks that are listening in, if you have an opportunity, please go on your favorite podcast network and hit subscribe. And for more advanced content, please go to thehealthcaregrind.com and put in your information and we'll put you on the newsletter. Brad, thank you so much for joining us. Jess and I just want to sign off and say, great job. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you so much, Lon and Jess. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
As we wrap up this episode of the Healthcare Grind, we want to thank you, our incredible audience, for tuning in. If you found today's insights valuable, don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback fuels our grind. For more exclusive content and updates, visit our website, healthcaregrind.com. Until next time, keep grinding, stay informed, and lead the charge in shaping the future of healthcare. This is Jess and Lon signing off from the Healthcare Grind.